Well, hello and welcome. You're watching India Fights Back with me, Rajat Kain. In this episode, we'll discuss about Delta variant and how it continues to be the variant of concern. There have been several studies on the Delta variant about how it remains variant of concern not just in India but across several countries. Over last few weeks, we have seen spurt or to say little waves in the countries besides India, be it Europe, be it Australia, be it US, UK included. There have been hike in numbers of COVID infection have increased. There have been cases where patients who have just got infected have required hospitalization. I mean, as a matter of relief, it's still not as severe as way we saw during the second wave in our country during the months of April and May. However, nobody is discounting that Delta variant needs to be studied further for its first to understand whether a vaccine is somewhat or to say to a large extent, effective against any other possible variant of the Delta. We have seen studies of the vaccines, of the vaccinations, which has proven that they are effective. I mean, some of them 60% to some of them 95% effective against the Delta variant. There are hypotheses. What if there is a new variant and how far these vaccines would be effective against that? Well, to further understand, the Delta variant and of course, like what we need to do, we're joined with Professor Y.K. Gupta. He's member of National Expert Group on Vaccine Administration for COVID-19. Many thanks, Professor Gupta, for joining us. And Professor Shailendra K. Saxena, he is Head Center for Advanced Research, King George's Medical College, University, Lucknow. Many thanks, Professor Shailendra Saxena, sir, for joining us. Let me start with you, Professor Saxena. In terms of the studies conducted worldwide in past couple of weeks, what are we listening more and more about the Delta variant, which remains a variant of concern in India as well till date?
See, before we go to the Delta variant, we need to understand that how actually this SARS-CoV-2, which is causing the COVID-19, is actually mutating. And if you know that as per the WHO classification, now the SARS-CoV-2 is mutating primarily in the spike region. And based on that, it has been given either the variant of concern or the variant of
interest,
importance, and then the Delta. Yeah. So that's how, and this all depends upon the various things, like, for example, increase in transmissibility of the virus. That is one of the important criteria to understand them. Second is the increase in the virulence. Third is the change in clinical signs and symptoms. And one of the very important part is also decrease in effectiveness of the public health and social measures which are available to us. That includes the available antivirals as well as the vaccines which we have at the moment. So these three things are playing a very important role in understanding. Now, once we go to the mutations which are playing a very important role in this, one of the mutations which we have seen early this year or late 2020 is D614G, which was the cause of the Delta variant. And
right.
We have huge discussions going on for last couple of months on this Delta variant. Very recently, we have seen that there were two more mutations added to this, and that's how the Delta plus variants came, and that was additional mutations, and that was K417N, corresponding to the lineage that was AY.1 and AY.2, and that's how the nickname has been given Delta plus, although still the nomenclature has to be looked. Although also a lot of people say this Nepal variant, but as a matter of the fact, we are not supposed to label any person, place, or thing. We are not saying these names at the moment.
Yeah.
So, but this has been given at that time. This is primarily because of the mutation at one of the position at 417, where one of the amino acid K has changed to N. And this mutation has been found associated with the second wave specifically, and later on, where we have seen that a lot of cases, at least whatever we have sequenced, a significant amount of the cases were found. Although in India, the cases is not that much as we have seen in UK and the other parts. But yes, this is very important for us to understand the virus in
Mm-hmm.
much more detail, as well as to see the effectiveness of the available vaccines which we have. So there's a lot of discussion going on whether these vaccines which we have are actually working against this or not. I'm sure in a little short while we'll discuss on that also.
Sure.
So at the moment, the baseline is that we have to understand the virus per se much more detail with reference to the recombinations and the mutations which is happening very oftenly in the SARS-CoV-2 and which will keep on happening also being the RNA virus.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Well, stay on, Professor Saxena. We have Dr. Professor Vaiki Gupta here as well. Sir, many thanks for being a part of the show, Professor Gupta. So we are seeing this is a new phenomenon in terms of having the administration of vaccine, even as we are seeing the pandemic unfolding to some extent or the other. Now, talking of the vaccination and especially of the Delta variant, what has studies so far said?
Dr. Saxena has very rightly mentioned, we must understand and appreciate that mutation is a normal and a constant phenomena for the virus.
Right.
It will mutate. And there are two types of nomenclature is used. One is vaccine of interest, the mutant of interest. That means there is some mutation, amino acid sequence change. We do not know what is the possible implication of this, but there is a large number of mutation and there is a mutation. That's why we call it a mutation of interest. We are watching it. The other is mutation of concern or VOC, virus or of concern means this is, as rightly said, either you have an increased transmissibility, 10 times more transmissibility than the previous one, or it has a much more virulent. The disease caused by this is much faster and much severe. Hospitalization is much early, and the death rate are more. So that is the VOC. Now, the important thing is these mutation may become partly non-responsive to the vaccine. And incidentally, fortunately, what we have seen is the Covaxin, which is developed as a from the virus and which cannot transmit virus, but which can stimulate antigen neutralizing antibody, is sufficient enough to produce neutralizing antibody titer, which will take care of even Delta plus and Delta mutant. It has also been seen that though the antibody titer against this mutation is less, yes, but even this less antibody titer is sufficient enough as on date to take care of this. So one important thing we must know that this may cause more number of breakthrough infection.
Okay.
But
Okay.
that means after taking vaccine, there may be infection. So there are two possibilities. If I have taken a vaccine and I get infection, A, I may be prevented fully. B, I may be prevented partly, but my disease will be much less virulent. Hospitalization rate will be less.
Right.
Number of deaths will be minimal or negligible or no death. And severity will be less. So my body is significantly prevented. The important thing is that even if I am vaccinated, I may get the same number of virus in my mucosa and I will be able to transmit it. So the transmissibility will remain. And therefore, the important thing is the relaxed atmosphere, of the social behavior, the more mixing, crowding, I think that is absolutely not warranted. And we have to be absolutely cautious, at least in next few months. So that is very important.
Right, right. Certainly. Important, in fact, to consider here is that we need to pay heed to everything possible so as to avoid another spike. One of them, of course, is COVID appropriate behavior. That's what our experts keep talking about. And in this particular program, well, our stress is to give you, dear viewers, scientific information. We have experts here which talk on the basis of science. So please, dear viewers,
And
listen to. Please,
I will
sir.
also add that this is important that because this vaccine will provide much more from 62%, and some studies have shown more than 70% protection against the Delta virus. And therefore, those who have still not willing to get vaccination should shed their vaccine hesitancy and get their vaccinations as and when
Right.
they get an opportunity.
Right, right. Professor Gupta, that's really important because we are still seeing cases or rather instances of vaccine hesitation. Professor Saxena, talking about vaccinations and of course, like as Professor Gupta just raised, very pertinent issue of vaccine hesitation. You think, I mean, when it comes to imparting or educating the beneficiaries, at least some communication is still lacking. That's why people are still little hesitant to take vaccine?
Vaccine hesitancy is a worldwide global problem. It is not just like in India. Yes, of
Okay.
course, in India it's a little higher, but it is everywhere. Even if you go onto the YouTube or any social site, social network site, you will say everywhere 5 to 10% people are very oftenly against to the something which they say jab. That is something which is piercing in the body. So this is nothing like that. We don't have to, or we are facing something new. How we are going to tackle this? That is a very important task for
Right.
the healthcare workers, and that has always been a very important issue and agenda whenever a new vaccine comes into the picture. Always there have been a lot of suspicion that there is something wrong or there is something, some political willingness behind that. There might be some other issues which are making the people hesitant. Only thing is the growing discussion and making them understand that yes, there is something which is going to happen to them. Is not something wrong. There is something which is already taken by the healthcare workers everywhere, and that kind of data, once it will be available to the people, and more communication will be available to the people. Of course, this hesitancy goes down. However, it takes time. Never like that you initiate something on television or any social site, and within a day everybody will understand. Everyone has its own perception, and they have their own ways of understanding. Not like that only the people who have the less level of literacy, they are only facing the problem. When the people who are literate enough, they are also having the problem. You might have seen there have been a group of people who said that let's say take one dose of vaccine from Covaxin and second dose maybe from Covishield and vice versa. That is called the mix. And you won't believe a lot of doctors worldwide have been behind that concept, and they thought this will be better without realizing the fact that both the vaccines are using a different platform to make the antibodies. They have a different agendas and
Absolutely.
by which they have been made. So people have to understand. So it's not like that only the illiterates have the problem with the vaccine hesitancy. It's a very well studied problem. People from community medicine and the other policy makers are always facing this. That how to make them educated. And the only thing is evidence-based medicine. Once the evidences are there, yes, the people who have been vaccinated, they haven't got infection now, because we do have the breakthrough infections, and that is creating another issue that see so and so got vaccination. In spite of that, they are getting infections. So we have to make them understand that the virus is mutating. So it might be possible that they might have got an infection from a newer strains. What strains which we know is the VOC and VOI. These are a limited number of now strains which we have studied, but there might be hundreds of the other mutations which we still do not know. Number one, and number two, even if you know the mutation, that means nothing until that has been characterized in a cellular, in a culture models in the lab, cell culture models, where they have been seen that whether they are actually creating more virus titer or more progenies, and that kind of studies are required. unfortunately, these kind of biological characterizations have been very less because it requires
Right.
a lot of cellular and molecular strategies to characterize these viruses. And doing this in a shortest possible time is another big challenge for us. So unless or until these evidence-based data will not be available, people will always have an opportunity to cross-question and to have the hesitancy against the vaccine. And of course, the political agendas are again different, which people always have, that benefit should not be going to go to one of the
Certainly.
parties or
Right.
other person. These are the various issues which we are always facing, and we are trying our best to make the people understand that this has nothing to do. It's always for your benefit. Please go for vaccination as early as possible, and
Right.
people are understanding and they believe and they go.
Right, sir. Right, right. So vaccination is paramount. It's really important for everyone whosoever is eligible should go for vaccination in terms of the doses. Professor Gupta, sir, continuing our discussion on Delta variant, they've been studies of latent hypothesis in regarding, say, cross mutants or another mutants of already existing severe Delta variant. Now, how far the current vaccine regime and the protocol would be successful if there is another severe variant like Delta?
It's a very possible question. As I said, that the mutation is a constant phenomenon. So mutation may take place, and mutation of or virus of interest or virus of concern. And if there is a mutation which may not respond to the, or which may not be effective by vaccine, what is the situation? Now, incidentally, the co-vaccine which is made from the virus, and therefore the possibility that the antigen which it produces will have the capability to produce antibody by and large, and therefore it will have a relatively larger, broader spectrum possibility. However, we presume that this platform technology can be easily and quickly be modified to suit the next variant if required. But as on date, fortunately, this vaccine is capable to produce antibody titer sufficient enough for the present variant, and maybe, but is always a challenge, is always will remain a challenge. And that's why the virology, vaccinology is becoming a very challenging science today. And we have to be constant vigil. And that's why government of India has given a huge money to buy the amino acid sequencer, so many sequencers, so that one can identify what type of mutant. And that's why the zero surveillance, or the surveillance of this the amino acid sequence is a very important thing. So this remains a challenge, but we are now much better prepared for this. The vaccine development science has become a much systematic, faster, and more targeted.
Right, right. Professor Saxena, your take, the hypothesis of another severe mutant and how far the current vaccination in terms of the duration, in terms of protocol, would be effective? Or you suggest, or as per you, we possibly need a revision of vaccine protocol?
As Sir has already said very clearly, that the recombination and the mutation is an ongoing process, specifically in the RNA virus. The same thing happening in this. So, getting a newer variant will be a continuous process. Every year, we might see a newer variant coming up. However, just like in flu shot in America, if you know, they have a rigorous program to envisage that what newer strains might come. What we are doing is, when a strain comes in, we do the sequencing and then we say XYZ new mutation has came up. However, there are the ways bioinformatically where we can look at what mutations can come over the period of months or years. Next year, what mutations can come, And based on those bioinformatic analysis, we can find out at least the potential mutants which might come in the next few months or a year to come. Now, if this becomes a routine process in a country like India, we might design our own vaccines well in advance. So that will be like just like flu shot, we might have the COVID shot every year well in advance. What we are doing now is we are taking the vaccine after the disease happens, or like a lot of people have, got the fatal infection in the second wave, and then they realize, yes, the vaccine is important. But because the disease is new, it always happens. Once the disease will also grow a little older, we will also have more insights that how these things can work. However, this is possible that we can design the vaccines well in advance. It might be a possibility that it might be 60 to 70% effective, but any vaccine which gives even 50% efficacy in a general population, that is treated as a good vaccine. So I personally feel if these kind of newer insights can be done well in advance, we might have a vaccine before even a new mutation comes. It might be possible that we have a better vaccine even before the new mutation gets inserted in these strains.
Right, right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, both of you. But before we leave, a very small question to both of you, sir. As we are seeing that, of course, there is often talk about a hypothetical or a possible third wave, and time and again we've been emphasizing on vaccination for whosoever is eligible in terms of the time frame, whether first dose or second dose, and lastly about the COVID appropriate behavior, which is keep wearing face masks, washing hands, and maintaining sanitation, of course, social distancing. Sir, given all these things, do you think there is still a vulnerable group for whom we need to protect and we need to be very careful? Let me start with you, Professor Gupta first. Please, sir.
The vulnerable group remains the same.
Right.
As with earlier. That means, first I would say those who are not vaccinated are vulnerable. So advice to them, get vaccinated. The second is those who are immune compromised. That means old and then people who are suffering from some disease, they are vulnerable. And those people who have renal disease, hypertension, renal disease, or cancer, they are vulnerable, so they should protect themselves. And lastly, those people who do not wear mask or do not have appropriate behavior, they themselves make themselves vulnerable, and they make others also vulnerable. So COVID appropriate behavior remains the number one. Vaccination, so this is important.
Right, right, right. Yeah, Professor Saxena, your take, sir.
Same thing as sir has said, the vulnerable population is same. Only the thing is, we always say the self-medication should be avoided. Specifically, a lot of people who are taking the aspirin and so on, we have recently seen the cases of Ray's syndrome. So those can be avoided if the self-medication can be stopped. What was happening, if you see in the second wave, that if somebody has been written XYZ medication, the other fellow has just copied to other fellows, see, I have given this, and they have taken. So please stop all these kind of things. COVID appropriate behavior, washing of your hands with soap and water is still a best precaution in spite of whatever vaccine you have taken, because the newer mutations can always come. And COVID appropriate behavior, which involves using masks, keeping 6 feet distance, and still avoiding the crowded places, is still one of the best remedy to prevent yourself from getting
Right. Well, this is really important. So there we have COVID appropriate behavior, vaccination, and of course, avoiding, crowded people. We have seen pictures of, hill stations and holiday destination which were fairly alarming. We hope that doesn't happen. So clearly, this is all we need to do so as to keep the pandemic at least in check. Many thanks, Professor Shailendra Saxena, for joining us. Many thanks, Professor Gupta, for being a part of the show. Well, this is really important, and many thanks for elucidating on this important subject. Well, that's it in this edition of show. Thank you. Goodbye.